Hey, this is Joe from Presonus. Today we're talking about pre- and post-fader sends. Every audio channel in Studio One has a send section. This allows me to take the audio from that channel and send it elsewhere. So I could, for example, send my vocal track to a reverb. You've probably seen that before. What you may not know is there are two different ways to use those sends, pre-fader and post-fader. Let's talk about those. But first, let's set up a send on this channel. So I've got some audio here playing quietly in the background, and I want to send this to a bus. Well, there's no bus in the session. Let's click on send. We can actually create the bus right here. Okay, so now we have our audio channel in blue and this bus in gray, and we can see there's signal on both. If you look closely, you'll see the signal here is actually quieter than this one. That's because the bus defaults to a -6 volume for the send. Just kind of a safety measure to make sure you don't blow things up. If you want to send the exact volume that you have here, hold down Command on the Mac or Control on the PC and click, and that will set it to 0, which is the unity state. You can actually do the same thing with faders. If the fader is not right at 0 and you want it to be right at 0, just Command click on it, bam, back at 0. Same thing works for panning. You'll notice if I click below the volume slider, there's a tiny little slider here that we can drag left and right, which is our panning. If I pan it all the way to the right, you can see the send is now panned to the right. So this channel only is getting a right signal, and we can go back and forth and adjust that however we want. If we want to go back to center, again, Command or Control click, and it goes back to the middle. Now this button here is the one we want to talk about in this video. This is the pre-fader on-off button. So the default mode for sends in Studio One is post-fader, but by clicking this we can switch it to pre-fader. So what does that mean? That is literally talking about where in this, if you imagine this blue channel as a channel strip on a mixer, and the signal comes in at the top and comes out at the bottom, for example, we're deciding where we're going to take that signal from. We can pick the signal off here before it reaches the fader, or here after it reaches the fader. Here's what that looks like. Right now, it is set up as a post-fader send. That's the default mode. Look what happens when I take the volume of this channel and turn it down. Pay attention to the volume of the send channel or the bus channel over here. As I turn this one down, we're turning down the signal there. Now, the metering in Studio One is a pre-fader metering, meaning even if I turn this all the way down, I will see signal on the meter. That lets me know there's audio there. I think that's actually really helpful. But we can see that by turning this channel down, we've turned down what we're sending to this bus. So as we turn this up and down, we are actually turning up and down the signal feeding this other channel over here through that send. Now if I click here and switch it, now you'll see it turns kind of yellowish. Now it is set to pre-fader send. Now if I adjust this volume up and down, it is not changing over here at all. This volume stays set. I can still change the volume by adjusting the send level. Okay, so we can still turn it up and down if we want to, but this fader no longer controls the volume on this channel. That's the main difference. Now, a common question will be, okay, how do we know if this signal is getting processing from the plugins or not? I always forget, and I have to remember, instead of memorizing that, we can just test it really quickly. I'm going to put Mix Tool plugin on here and just turn the gain up by 24 decibels. That's plenty loud. And let's just see, let's go back to a post-fader send. I'm going to hit play. We can see the signal, the level for both is the same, okay? Everything's equal. Now, when I turn this plugin on, what happens? Does it increase the volume of this channel, or does it also increase the volume of the second one? Okay, we can see we just added 24 decibels of gain to both sides. All right, so that means in post-fader mode, the signal going to the send is coming after the inserts, after the plugins. What about pre-fader? Is pre-fader before the plugins or after? Well, let's just find out. Switch to pre-fader mode. Everything looks the same. Turn the plugin on. Aha, okay. Now we know that this is actually very linear and it's going from top to bottom. So whatever happens up here is happening to the signal being sent through the sends. Okay, so if we put an EQ plugin here, that EQ'd signal is going to the send as well. Okay, so it's post effects, but pre-fader. It's a true pre-fader and post-fader send. It's the only difference is where the send is coming from, before the fader or after the fader. Everything else stays the same. Now that I've shown you the mechanics, let's talk about a couple of creative applications for this. There are millions of ways you can use sends creatively. Let me show you two really simple ways to use both pre and post fader sends on a vocal with a reverb plugin. So I grab the plugin that I want and drag it onto the send section. Studio One does the work for me. It creates the send, it creates the effects channel, it puts the plugins there. If I hit play, I should hear reverb on this vocal. I need to stop. Big, huge reverb. It's a little too much, so I'm going to turn down the send here. Let's see if that sounds better. I need to stop listening. Now in this scenario, 9 times out of 10, I want this to be a post-fader send. That means as I'm adjusting the volume of the vocal, either early on in the mix during the rough mix or later in the mix when I'm doing vocal automation, I want the amount of reverb relative to the vocal to stay the same. So if this is the lead vocal and this is the reverb, as the lead vocal turns down, I want the reverb to turn down. Otherwise, if I turn the vocal down, the reverb might stay at the same level, and that'll sound weird. It'll sound like that the ratio, the balance between reverb and vocal keeps changing as the vocal changes volume. Don't necessarily want that. So in this scenario, post-fader send, as I'm adjusting the volume of the vocal, you'll hear the volume of the reverb move with it, kind of like a nice little dance. Let's check it out. I need to stop listening to voices in my head, but they're on to something. Yeah, they're on. Okay, so that is an example of a post-fader send. As the fader moves up and down, the amount going to that second channel moves up and down as well. Very natural, a way you would expect it to work. However, what if there's this part of a song where the vocal does this big scream like, ah, and we don't want to hear the dry vocal because it's too harsh, but we want to hear the sound of that vocal in the reverb? Well, the solution there would be to flip this button and go to a pre-fader send. And now I can turn up the reverb amount. We've got a decent amount of reverb on this vocal. I need to stop. Now listen to what happens as I turn the vocal fader down. I need to stop listening to voices in my head. So now we're hearing only reverb. Now you could do this by putting the reverb on the channel and setting the mix all the way to 100%, but you can probably start to see how you can get really creative with this. We could do this with reverb, but also with some sort of, let me do like a analog delay pre-fader send. So you can see how not even hearing, we don't hear the raw vocal, the dry vocal at all. We're just hearing the affected vocal, and that can be really interesting. And then we can always bring it back in if we want to balance. But suddenly it's almost like everybody's acting independently, which opens up a lot of cool new creative options. Another common use for pre-fader send is for if I've got a synth that's going and I'd rather it go using that ducking sort of sound that you're used to hearing in like a pop synth music, I could have a kick drum on a channel that's going doom, 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 doom. But if I don't want to hear the kick drum, but I want the kick drum to trigger that compressor, side chaining on the synth, I can set it up with a pre-fader send, turn the kick drum all the way down. We don't hear the kick drum, but now the synth goes because we've done a pre-fader send using side chaining. So those are a couple of examples of how to use it. We could probably do a full day's worth of showing all the different ways you can use pre and post fader sends in your sessions. Go play around with them. Try something you haven't tried before. Leave a comment. Let us know how it goes. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.